This video shows you how I painted a red and white tulip using watercolor paints, and if you want to see how I drew it out, that was in my previous video and the link for that is below. And I'm using just 3 colors to paint this entire picture. So I'm using Winsor red, I'm using Payne's gray, and I'm using sap green as well. And I use those to do all the colors in the picture. So I start with the background, and here you can see me just putting color straight on with lots of water. So I'm combining the colors on the paper as I go along. So I'm putting on some of the red and green together, and together they'll make a brown. And then I'm adding Payne's gray as well to darken that brown, or to just put some slightly more darker shadow areas into what is, you know, just a washy, watery background. I don't want this to detract from the power of the flower. So with all those colours on and all sort of washed together, I use a bit of tissue paper here to kind of blot some slightly lighter patches in the background. Then I start painting the flower itself. And here you can see me combining Payne's grey and Winsor red together and working from my dark areas up towards my light areas. And again, I'm working the paints directly on the paper surface. I'm not doing too much mixing in a palette first of all. So, you know, I'm adding a bit of Payne's grey with a bit of water so it's nice and fluid, then adding a bit of the Winsor red and then mixing them together because Payne's grey has got kind of bluish tinge to it when it dries. So I'm hoping that the red and the kind of blue-grey will blend together to give me this nice cool purple. That's the idea behind using Payne's grey instead of perhaps another classic kind of blue. So adding colours directly onto the paper and mixing them on the paper can obviously have its drawbacks. What if you add too much colour and it's too bright? Well, that's when, you know, watercolour comes into its own. You can just dilute it straight up by getting your brush in the clean water and slapping a bit of water in there straight away. Then you've got too much fluid on the paper. So you can either dry your brush and suck some up with the dry brush, or you can use the tissue paper which I showed you, and you can blot it very, very gently, very, very carefully in order to try and get it, you know, not so bright, take it down a little notch. The other thing you can see me doing is just adding a lot of water. I start nice and dark with those colours, but then as I work up each of the petals towards where it's lighter, I'm adding water and working that water into the colour in order to get a sort of gradation of tone from dark to light. So with the base colours put in, what I decide I need to do is put some of those creases that you see in some of the petals, and the way that I do that is I use a brush with just clean water on, and I work the clean water, reactivating the paint, if you will, and then blotting it with the tissue paper to bring it out. Then I decide that the petals weren't dark enough, so I decided to go back in with more Payne's grey and more red and mix up a bit more and make some of those shadow areas a little bit darker. The other thing that I decide to do is, because you can see the pattern on those petals and there's kind of those flicked bits of colour, I decide to use a bit of dry brushing. So here I've got quite a lot of pigment on the brush, and what I do is I flick that brush away from the centre outwards towards the edge of the petals, and it gives me that kind of like pointy ridged kind of pattern that you can see on the photograph on the left hand side. To do that dry brushing, I'm using a lot of pigment on the brush, but not so much water, so there's a lot of colour and it's not going to flow around so much. And at this stage you can see me just adding a little bit to some of those shadows, just to make the very bottom part of those shadows a little bit darker, or to add a bit of definition to some of the leaves. Some of the leaves that are actually from the plant and the stalk, I just use a combination of Payne's grey and sap green here in order to fill those in, and the Payne's grey acts as my shadow and makes some of those leaves a bit more shadowy and a bit darker. Here you can see me just adding a little bit of shadow there in between, so you can see the shape of that petal in front of the other one. And I also get a little bit fussy, adding a little bit more red to the tips of the petals, so they're a little bit less purple and a bit more red. And also I sort of re-emphasize the creases by going in again, reactivating that watercolour with water on a clean brush and blotting it. And at this stage, it kind of looked like it was finished, but I thought the background was too light and didn't emphasize the highlights on the flower. So I decided to go back in and add a second layer to the background, exactly the same colours, the Winsor red, the Payne's grey and the sap green, but blending them in and deliberately trying to make areas a little bit darker this time around, so that hopefully when the entire background was finished with the second layer of colour, it would be dark and it would emphasise the highlights and the white areas on the flower, and that would give the picture a little bit more pop and a little bit more depth and make it come out with a bit more 3 dimensions. And after just a little bit more blotting with some clean tissue paper, it went from looking quite light like this to looking a lot darker like this. And hopefully that extra contrast does make the flower pop out. You let me know in the comments below what you think about it, and also don't forget to share and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And if you want to see my previous watercolor video where I did this daffodil in a similar kind of style, you can find the links for that below. Thanks for watching.